Silvio Funtowicz. So Mr. Funtowicz, I will try to introduce you very briefly and trying not to be ridiculous because I don't know you. I've read that you were a mathematician and a philosopher, that you had been teaching in Argentina and United Kingdom, and you recently retired from the European Commission's Joint Research Center 5 years ago. So, and that is the Commission's in-house scientific department. You are the co-author of a much-quoted book published in 1990, Uncertainty and Quality in Science for Policy. And you have published numerous papers in the field of environmental and technological risks and policy-related research. You have in particular contributed to create the concept of post-normal science, which is an attempt to, I'm quoting, characterize a methodology of inquiry that is appropriate for cases where facts are uncertain, values in dispute, stakes high, and decisions urgent. Sounds like a very appealing prospect. So as I said, I will not try to summarize your work as I don't know it well enough. But when I contacted you to ask whether you would be interested in contributing to our conference, you answered that you would be more than happy to discuss the legitimacy crisis of science and democracy, the two pillars of the European modern state. So honestly, I had simply not thought about discussing such a wide topic. But after 5 seconds, it was very clear that it was an excellent idea, because I think it's a very important background discussion that we need to have for a properly informed discussion on these issues. So I had really thought I could not refuse, and I'm more than happy to give you the floor for 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I will have some slides, but it's not don't open it yet.
Okay.
It's not a PowerPoint presentation. These slides are just as a background for you to see. So you realize I'm not inventing everything I'm saying. Thank you. I got this on purpose. I'm going to, what it comes out from all these conversations we have up to now is that the relation between science and democracy is rather a complex affair. And so I'm using Naomi's disclaimer saying that if you concentrate on A, it doesn't mean that you're dismissing B. So I'm concentrating here not on the power of corporations to influence policies, but on a different aspect of the science-democracy relation, okay? So, and I will start illustrating my presentation with one case that it is quite known, and it is here, TTIP, and it was already mentioned. Can I have the... This is from a late May issue of Nature, and it is precisely about the trade agreement between European Union and the US. That was already mentioned. I think most of you are familiar with the discussions and debates about the issue. What I want to highlight is that in this issue of Nature, which is the high impact journal on science that everyone wants to publish in it, has two articles, one article and one editorial, okay? And the first one is about, the title is about trade treaties centered on science, okay? And the second is the subtitle, that the proposed deal have the potential to boost research, but also to weaken health and environmental protection. And this is quite paradoxical. How is it possible that we based our treaties on science? Those have an effect of weakening health and environmental protection. And that's the question I want to address today. Now, in the editorial, it's also quite interesting because it starts with the use of sound science. And then it goes to the need to contextualize that sound science into what are the historical, cultural, legal, and other aspects in which that sound science is done. And here perhaps you can relate that to when we are talking about science, we are talking about the risk assessment, for example. And risk assessment, the paradigm is the one of sound science. But when we talk about history, culture, and all the rest, we are no longer talking about risk assessment in our received view. We are talking about the risk management. So there's a strict separation between risk assessment and risk management, which starts to conceptualize, and then it is institutionalized in the way we work on the subject. For example, think about the European Commission, like other international institutions. When there is a problem that has some kind of scientific basis, they have an expert group. And that expert group deals with the facts. So there are questions that are allowed and questions are not allowed. So you can ask the question, is it safe? But you can ask the question, who benefits? Now, that also takes us to a question about the precautionary principle. Everybody who is around Brussels and other places knows that the precautionary principle is put in the realm of risk management and not on the risk assessment. So, for example, it was also mentioned the biosafety. Someone on public mentioned biosafety. We have the Cartagena Protocol, which in a sense introduces the notion of precautionary principle just as it was designed in the Rio Conference, Article 5 or Proposition 5 of the Local Sustainability Agenda 21. But when it comes to international agreement and a possible conflict between the two, the Cartagena Protocol and the World Trade Organization, we know who wins and who loses. Because the World Trade Organization doesn't believe in the precautionary principle, but in sound science. Now, the fact is that we can explain this historically, because one of the great innovation of the modern European state was a double system of legitimacy. Science on one hand, and on the other hand, what we can call democracy, parliamentary institutions, and all the rest. There was a division of labor. Science was in charge of facts, whereas democracy, the parliament, was in charge of values. And the idea is that those two elements of legitimacy can work together and coexist. So, for example, can we go this second? It took a while until it was expressed in a certain way that was clear, and it's part of our European tradition. Condorcet. The idea that both the progress in science and technology is also matched by a moral progress. The idea that those things come together. So, at the same time that science develops and technology develops, we have a development in the ethical aspects, in the moral. The idea is that the truth and the good are tightly coupled. Therefore, the truth related to the facts, related to science, are matched by the good related to values and remaining to the parliamentary democratic system. This fundamental idea was very powerful. Very, very powerful. And we have an unprecedented development in science and technology, and at the same time of the parliamentary system, the ideas about democracy, and our ideas of human rights, for example. So we had the developments of science and technology. On the other hand, we had developments on the institutional aspects of it. And our ideas about democracy, about citizenship, about human rights, etc. Okay. So the ideas about the division of labor between science and democracy was based on the possibility of separating facts from values. And how was it done? Well, can we have the next one? Well, here we have Galileo Galilei de Assai. He argues that, and I will show you this, I will show Galileo did, if I take this piece of paper, if I take this piece of paper and I do this on my beard, it will tickle. Is that important that it tickles? And Galileo says, no, it's not important, because it tickles me. The fact that this has a color white, is that important? No, this is not important, because I see it white. What is important is that this has a length and this has a mass. This is what it is important. And this is the basis of what we call today modeling. So, and Galileo obtains this result of separating facts and values by calling these primary and secondary qualities. And what is important for scientific work is the primary qualities that are independent of ourselves. And in this way, you can justify and say science is objective, science is value-free, science is neutral. And the institutionalization of this distinction is what enables this division of labor. Not only that, not only Galileo, who was creating a scientific method by demarcating ourselves from the subject of our study, also divided the system to be studied in components he assumed were almost isolated and almost stable. And that was the institutional development of that is disciplinary universities. And you can work in a linear way, adding the parts. The relation between the parts was not important. Now, at the same time, Hume, for example, was arguing about and talking about reason and passion. And why it was so important? Because Hume and others at the time attributed uncertainties to human passion. If we had a method to separate reason from passion, with reason we don't have uncertainty. So if we put together Galileo, for example, and Hume, we have the answer. We separate facts and values, so we separate reason from passion, and therefore we don't have uncertainty and we can study the facts as they are. And that is also the base of legitimacy of the modern European state. The strong separation between facts and values, the idea that science produces the truth, and the truth goes hand in hand with the good. So the idea that those things coexist. Again, I have to say that this has resulted in an unprecedented development of both science, technology, and citizens and modern democratic states. Now, what was plausible in the time of Galileo and after Condorcet and quite recently, it seems to be, is no longer plausible, is no longer functional. The ideas, I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate my case. I said it was plausible when we were talking about certain type of physics, about certain type of chemistry, or certain type of biology. But now that we are talking about, and I think, science and technology and the difficulty to separate science from technology, and we are talking about, as a shorthand, technoscience, and moreover, innovation research, as it is called today in Brussels, we see that it is people who develop information and communication technologies. There is no doubt that they contribute with knowledge. But at the same time, they are entrepreneurs. The Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all the others, they have a business to further. They have shareholders. So they also have interests and values involved. So they have become not the traditional image of our scientists, of curiosity-driven scientists, but they have become hybrids, a mixture of scientist entrepreneur. This is not only valid for information and communication technology, it's also valid for nanotechnology. Craig Venter and synthetic biology, he also contributed with knowledge. At the same time, he has a business to manage. On the other hand, we have in Europe realized quite a while ago that citizens have knowledge also. They are not only contributors of values or interests. And we recognize that farmers and fishermen have knowledge to contribute. But not only them, then we extended it to traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge. And now we have citizens science with crowdsourcing and crowdfunding and all the rest. They are also hybrids. So the idea that you can continue to separate between, on one hand, providers of facts, and on the other, providers of values, and that is institutionalized in institutions that deal with facts and deal with values, is anachronic today. Reasons about the growing conflict, not only in America, where it has a peculiar ideological twist, but also in Europe. Remember the whole discussions about the chief scientific advisor. Now, that the distinction between facts and values is not new. Part of the ideas that come today into the ambiguity, the vagueness of the distinction, we are rooted back to Galileo. Galileo thought that numbers, the book of the universe is written in numbers. And the metaphor he used is that if you didn't know mathematics, numbers, then you were like a blind person walking in a maze. So these ideas of quantification, the fact that numbers express a state of affairs, was institutionalized because each modern European state had a statistical office. And in the word statistics, you have already in state at the beginning. And the first book on statistics was called Political Arithmetic, and was William Petty. So quite the nature of the word statistics related to the nature of the word evidence, they come back together. Can I have the next one? Okay. Let me show you one example of the discussions because I think it's pertinent to what we are talking today. This is from 1953, so quite a while ago, more than 60 years. And it's a discussion in the Journal of Philosophy of Science, which discusses the distinction between facts and values. And Rutner's argument was, well, that scientists working on scientists express values. And the point I want to make here, is when I bring it, is the fact that, what is the example? What's the key word here? Evidence. So, Rudner's argument is that already in the word evidence, you have expressed values. And that has to do precisely to statistics, to distinguish which is an anecdote from established knowledge, or a fact, or evidence. And you know why we have this 5-10% rule? Well, the creator of the modern experimental method, E.R. Fisher, I think most of you know him. Here, when he proposes the test of hypothesis, he says, it seems reasonable to adopt a 5%, 10% rule. Now, my question is, to be reasonable is an expression of fact or an expression of value? Now, so, I'm not going to talk today about evidence and all the rest, but these are just snippets of elements that will contribute to the debate, and why I believe that we will concentrate on the influence of corporations on science and on policy making and the rest. We are missing a big part of the picture. And I think that it was interesting to see how the two previous speakers and the questions around started talking about corporations. Since we're talking about corporations, and suddenly we are talking about science. Now, science is always changing. And what we could with plausibility argue at a certain point in development of science, at another point is no longer plausible. I want to finish, and this will be my last contribution, related to how I see the problem in this case. And in order to do that, I will show you my last slide is a contribution from someone who is, it's rather strange. And this is Dwight Eisenhower farewell address to the nation in 1961. Many people remember this address because he mentioned the industrial military complex. But there was another part, which is less discussed really, which is quite pertinent to what we are talking about today. I will ask you to look at the first part. And this is interesting because it talks about the issue, the subject we discussed previously, which is funding. And the idea about the change in what science does and how it does, the political economy of science, and how that influences knowledge. So, the second part is also interesting because he argues that, of course, we have, because we value science, we have to keep science independent. On the other hand, there is a symmetrical and antagonistic risk, which is, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite that the public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. Now, what is to be done? I think that the solution is not technical. First of all, Eisenhower recommends citizens to be vigilant, and I think it's always good. And the nature of the challenge is such that we are not asking for technical changes here. Things that can be, in a sense, buried in a new type of technology. In order to face these challenges that we have today, and the growing crisis, and the growing conflict between science and democracy, we have to think about important institutional and constitutional changes. Very difficult to talk here about changing constitutions. but clearly in the modern European state, the distinction between facts and values, the division of labor between science and policy, democracy and parliament is enshrined. No matter how much we ask for precautionary principle, if it's not in the right place, we are not going to change. Therefore, my feeling is that there should be a very robust debate of some of acquired ideas about this distinction of facts and values, about the institutional consequences, about what constitutes evidence, and we are not going to do that without changing our ideas about institutions and constitutions in Europe and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques Gerlache from Green Facts, which is a small association that produces faithful summaries of key consensus reports on scientific matters. Thank you very much to put also the question of science itself and not only on the relationship of science with companies, with money and whatsoever. Because indeed there are limits to science. And don't you think that one of the limits of the science of today is that this paradigm is fully reductionist and is just not able to catch and to evaluate the global and the complex system in which we live, and that's really a big problem. I will take a simple example. I'm originating from the research, basic research on cancer and the cancerogenesis process. 30 years ago, the paradigm, independent from any pressure from money whatsoever, was that the origin of cancer was a single mutation. 30 years ago, it was already clear that this hypothesis was nonsense. And the scientists themselves were completely involved in this paradigm, and it took for them 35 years to get rid of this reductionist paradigm and to realize that indeed cancer was a much more complex problem. And if it's the case for cancer, it's the same for all the problems we encounter, especially with climate, with nanotechnologies, with GMO and modifying the biological nature of the system. Don't you think that this is not also a problem, this too reductionist approach that is still the root of research and science of today?
Yes, I agree with that, and you gave a good example. There are many others that will match your comment. I didn't want to go into today about reductionist science because it was not the subject and it would have taken more time than I can. But thank you for the contribution.
Hello, Lisette Van Vliet from Health and Environment Alliance. I'm feeling a bit lost, but I just want to go back to the slide you had from the quote from Rudner. Rudner.
Yeah.
That one to me, one more over, further along, not back.
After.
Keep going.
Keep going.
One more, that's it.
Yes.
Because what struck me about that slide is not there that the most important concept is evidence, but there the most important concept is enough. Because that takes us back to the debates we have in toxic chemicals. Yes. Of how much evidence do you need about a chemical's toxicity before you say, this is enough to decide that our trajectory is bad, and we're going to stop waiting to find out what the rest of the trajectory does before we take political action?
Well, I understand your point. I think that still the point I was trying to make relates to how we understand evidence.
One question in the back as well.
Hello, this is Jamie Page from the Cancer Prevention and Education Society. We're a UK charity that tries to reduce human exposure to harmful chemicals. It's just really an observation about science and technology. The problem I have is they conflate the two words now. They always say science, and if you're cautious about technology, you're anti-science, which may not be the case. So For example, you might be interested in how the atom works, you might be interested in how the atom is split even, but that doesn't mean that you should then go and split it, and that for me is the distinction between science and technology. And to accuse people who are concerned about the splitting of the atom of being anti-science is, well, it's just rude. That's an observation. I'm not just saying that to you, but it's our opponents often do that to us, especially in the United Kingdom. The other observation too is I went to Imperial College, and there's a very famous science museum around the corner. And in the 70s, it was a wonderful museum. It was a real science museum. They had the history of science and phlogiston and oxidation and all of that. And now it's been completely, in my opinion, Disneyfied. It's like a theme park museum. It's just glorification of technology. And that one museum, if you ever want to see how science and technology has been conflated to somehow make it more appealing to consumers, you just need to go there. So no criticism, just some observations.
Yes, thank you. I think that the discussion about science technology, when I came to work for the European Commission or the Joint Research Center many years ago, I work associated with the commissioner and the rest of research that dealt with science. And now I see around very little about science and research, but I see a lot of innovation. Now, that tells us something about the trajectory. And I don't have the time, perhaps it's not the place, to talk about, for example, how people quote Richard Feynman, a fundamental physicist, to justify the engineering tone and style that characterizes biotechnology, nanotechnology, and synthetic biology and others. Thank you.
Nicholas Ashford again. Thank you, of course, for this work and all the other that I'm familiar with. Of course, scientists have always made values in terms of what methodologies they use. You mentioned the issue of statistical significance, but it goes much deeper than that. And it goes into the issue of where you have great uncertainty, what kind of errors you want to make. And we talk about type 1 versus type 2 errors. Are you afraid you're over-regulating and then unduly imposing costs upon industry, or are you failing to see the problems? And of course, the early warnings, late lessons work of EEA is very relevant here. But when it comes down to actually providing a balance between avoiding this error or that error, it's not subject to quantification. I mean, you can make some heroic assumptions, but instead of fostering accounting, which is the province of cost-benefit analysis, and you didn't mention economists, because they've taken this and then screwed it the way they want to, but you foster accountability, not accounting, you move from the technical into the political.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Can you show the slide I didn't show, which is on the precautionary principle? That's the one I mentioned, that it is part of the Cartagena Protocol of Biosafety, and many of you know it. The Commission, of course, has a variation on this, and we work in, I think it was the first communication of, I can't remember the year, sorry for that. But substantially, if you see, here something that relate to values, because relate about what error you want to avoid, is reduced again to cost-benefit analysis. So it is devolved to economy. I can think of many ways in which the precautionary principle can be phrased, avoiding that idea. And the question I wanted also to ask, why is it risk management and not risk assessment? Don't we have the possibility of a scientific way of dealing with precaution? And I argue that we have, but we don't have the time to talk about this today.
Only if you take the cost based on existing technology. If you say, if I hold industry's feet to the fire, somehow we will have a better sweetener, a better chemotherapeutic agent. You cannot actually predict what that new technology is going to be. So cost-benefit analysis is useless, except in the most reductionist case. You have a faith in intellectual creativity, or you have the faith that nothing can happen and technology can be frozen.
Yeah.
So this belief does not lend itself to any kind of statistical analysis, how innovative you could be.
Thank you.
That's an excellent appetizer. That's an excellent appetizer for tomorrow's panel on exactly this issue, the cost-benefit analysis, the better regulation. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to cut you. You're very welcome to continue the conversation over coffee. We'll take a 15-minute break now. Thank you very much.